Before I say who I am, two requests. Please, no flash photography, and we'd be grateful if you turned off your cell phones. I just did that myself. Good evening. I'm Kwame Anthony Appiah. I'm president of the PEN American Center. As I'm sure... Thank you. As I'm sure you all know, we're one of the 141 centers of International PEN, which is the world's oldest human rights and international literary organization, founded in 1921 to promote understanding across the nations. PEN American Center works within the rest of the PEN family to advance literature and to defend free expression here and around the globe. And nothing could more fully embody the spirit of PEN than an international literary festival. So, as the MC says in cabaret, willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. And let me add akwaba, which is welcome in my father's language, Ashanti Tree. I'm delighted to be here to welcome you to one of the more than 60 events of this 5th PEN World Voices Festival, conceived, chaired, and inspired by Salman Rushdie, and brilliantly curated by Carol Llewellyn. And let me parenthetically thank Salman for his 5 years of service so far and for agreeing to continue to serve PEN and the literary community in this way. Our festival includes 160 writers from more than 40 countries. In the program, I count writers and translators working in and out of Arabic, Ashanti Tree, Basque, Catalan, Chinese, Danish, Dutch, German, Greek, Hebrew, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Haitian Creole, Hungarian, Norwegian, Polish, Russian, Swedish, and Turkish, as well as in the many forms of language we call English, French, and Spanish. And this year we're joined by an Australian graphic novelist, Sean Tan, who's found a way to create great prize-winning fiction with no words at all in any language. It takes a lot of people and a lot of supporters to make this magnificent series of events happen, but I want to offer very special thanks in particular to the Penguin Group and to its chairman and CEO, John Makinson, who are our major sponsors this year. We're grateful too to all the other sponsors whose names you'll find in the program, and as always, we owe a great debt of gratitude to a splendid team of volunteers who help to keep the program moving. There are too many events, as I said, for me to tell you about all of them. There are copies of the program available here, and you can also find all the information you need at www.pen.org/worldvoices. But I do want to say that I'll be back here myself on Sunday to introduce the 4th annual Arthur Miller Freedom to Write lecture by Noel El-Sadawi, who, as you know, is a great Egyptian writer and activist and one of the leading cultural and political voices of our times. But that's more than enough for me, because right now I'm standing between you and the chance to hear an amazing international assortment of globally acclaimed writers who'll be reading to us in their own languages. And don't worry if you're not sufficiently multilingual to understand them, because you'll be able to follow along with the English translations on the screens. Afterwards, there'll be a chance for you to get books signed by them outside, and they will be telling you who they are before they speak, and their biographies are in your program. So welcome then, all of you, and enjoy this opening course of our literary feast. Welcome.
Triomf de la vida. Into something rich and strange. William Shakespeare. Vida, tu d'on sorgeixes? Quin afany poderós pot desvetllar-te mínima el més imperceptible pòsit dur de la pedra? De la pols mineral que va, s'alça i es mescla al metall decidit, pur en cossos perfectes, amb macles de pirites o suspès en argiles en la carnal hortosa? Del cristall absolut, guspira d'oliví, el magma corsecat de la pedra volcànica? Llisques damunt del quars, llum en la llum del nombre, absorta en els teus límits eterns però amb llavor d'un destí molt més alt que passa per la dura mancança de la forma. Gasos, vapors, sacsegen boires absolutes damunt estanys de febre, en la caiguda arrel a la mínima estructura, tendresa imperceptible del codi més lleuger, immarcessible llei, neguit etern, neguit de retornar al cristall mental del pensament, neguit enterc del líquen, neguit carnós del fong, doll fresc de la falguera, música de l'espora. Quin miracle congries en el teu créixer, tany, passió de la saba, esclat fugaç, projecte, cristall vivent, imatge del passat i el futur, diamant de la flor, misteri de la rosa. Per tu es veuen pagades les eures més obscures, l'herba i la vinya verge, la blava genciana, el saüquer, el gerani, l'estàtica palmera, l'olivera, el llorer, tota la flora alpina avesada a les neus, el vent glaçat que exhorta a acceptar el més humil destí d'obscur rizoma, esperant primavera sempre massa fugaces. La flora tropical, sempre exudant febrosa, perdent-se sempre extensa en fulles generoses, grandiloqüent i sempre tenebrosa de verd, movent-se lentament pels camins de l'accés, voraç d'ella mateixa, que es podreix i reneix. Ah, carnívores flors, que us nodriu de la flor mòbil que no enteneu, gràcia a l'insecte, lliure flor de tanys vagarosos, coroles d'ales, èlitres, mosca, joiell i màquina, escarabat absurd, cantàrida, marac de viatgera, i tu, grill, ritmador dels estius, abagot insistent, abella industriosa, mare de mels i ceres. I tu, mantis llenyosa, llagosta de rostoll, enyorosa de fulles, encara emmirallant en passats vegetals, branquilló de bambú. Tu, ofidi lliscós, doble llengua que escolta ritmes passats de tronc, que avances cap a sangs calentes, verinoses, tu, nus que estreny dolcíssim. Tu, anguila germana, que compleixes el cicle de la roca al fangueig, del rierol al mar, llampec nocturn de lluna. Tu, peix esmunyadís, obscur, el teu reialme d'aigües dolces, salades, peix que et menges el peix, peix que pastures algues. Tu, tortuga oblidada, iguana, cocodril, mandíbula implacable, dents de tots els terrors. Tu, llangardaix humil de pell resseca i trista, vell prematur, i tu, la gràcil sargantana, regina de clivelles, artifici d'or verd, de quines mans d'orfebre. Quin destí cap al seny, quin foc d'ardent desig et va escalfar les sangs. Quins fils desconeguts et van tesar les ales i et vas alçar potent des de la roca esquerpa, àliga, emperadriu dels països celestes. Quin cabdal de tendresa s'amaga al plomissol del pit roig, del pinsà, de la lleu cadernera, del rossinyol ocult que canten els fondals. Quin afany clous, falcó, en els teus cercles tràgics, glòria dels ocells, i tu, agró maldestre, pescant entre canyissos. Cap on vas tu, castor, construint, enfangat, musell dolç, cua plana, llúdriga pescadora, suavíssim ermini. Tu, cavall comprensiu, tu, ase humiliat, tu, gat, tu, os, senglar, tu, gos, tu, lleopard, tu, vaca mugidora d'ulls immensos, lleó que devora la daina, cèrvol que fuig del tigre, llop que fuig de la fam, home que fuig de l'home. Home, pou de terrors. Sents només la sang espessa de tants canvis, el desig de la pols, de retornar al no-res, per un destí tan llarg, fatigós de metalls, d'ales, de sangs glaçades, d'urpes i de renills, d'astes, d'ullals, de becs, de plomes i d'escates, de tendresa i d'oblit, d'astúcia i de caça, d'instints empresonats. Fes teu el teu viatge. Torna al teu nombre pur. Torna't vida més alta, cicle d'un altre cicle, matèria, esperit, voluntat i desig, mineral i vapor, vida i no res fets un sol sentit del sentit, sol sentit sense sentit. Llibertat. Llibertat d'escampar-se i vagar pels espais sense cloure's en el nom que lligant-nos ens fa llavor més lliure. Jo en el tot i en el nom que encercla tot impuls generós, recobrant-me, trobant-me en tu i en tots, en el tot i en el nom que comprèn i ens comprèn, que ens afirma negant-nos. Nom, reclòs en el nom, extasiat del nom. Nom, amor pur del nom. Nom, cristall del seu nom.
I am Raja Shehadeh of Palestine. I will read from Palestinian Walks, Forays into a Vanishing Landscape, of an encounter during one of my walks in the Palestinian hills with a Jewish settler from the settlement of Dolev, 10 miles north of Ramallah, where I live. Just as I reached the water, I realized that someone else was already there. I noticed him from the corner of my eye. I did not look directly at him. I did not want to allow him to disturb my peace. But I knew he was there and that he was an Israeli settler. It was then that I decided that I noticed a strong, unusual smell. I realized it was that of hashish mixed with another more potent substance that I could not identify. When I arrived, the settler was busy preparing his nargile, water pipe, on a flat rock right next to the stream. He was surprised by my unexpected entry into his private little enclave and stopped what he was doing. He could not immediately be certain who I was, perhaps an Israeli, a man of the law, someone who could arrest him for smoking the forbidden weed. But of course, he had the authority. He was the law. He also had a gun, and the settler can shoot at the Palestinian with impunity. I took a careful look at his face. It was narrow with a prominent nose and kind, intelligent eyes. He had long, straight brown hair that reached down to his shoulders, falling on both sides of his head like a scarf. He was clearly an Israeli settler, as I had assumed from the start. But I didn't want to judge him. I wanted to be on my way. Without uttering a word, I concentrated on choosing the best stepping stones to ford the brook. I almost got to the other side when I heard him call in Hebrew, "Your hat, you've dropped your hat." He had a soft, kind voice. Still, I was surprised to be accosted by the settler. I had somehow not expected it and was hoping to just slip by, unseen, unseeing, each to his own. But this was not to be, not anymore, not in the Palestinian hills in the spring of 2006. My hat was going downstream quickly. I crouched to get it, but couldn't. I saw it floating and bobbing over the rocks. The Israeli rushed after it. He was younger and more nimble than I. He caught it. He stood there holding it toward me. My gaze wandered from him to the rock where he had balanced his nargile and where his gun also rested. His eyes followed mine, and I saw him stiffen, evidently trying to decide between running to the gun and giving me my hat. I didn't move. I was curious which way he would go. Now, using English, I said, "Your gun is out of place, leaning against that rock, don't you think?" He didn't speak. Perhaps he didn't understand my English. I rephrased what I said. "This beautiful day and the gun don't go together." After a brief silence, he spoke. He was almost apologetic, which is most untypical of an Israeli. He said, "I know, but I have to." Looking at the nargile, I asked, "Do you come here frequently?" I was wondering whether he often ran away from home to smoke his dope in private, whether our hills now served as refuge for young Israeli settlers indulging in illicit practices. "It's my favorite spot," he answered. Of course, I thought, a perfect hideout. "Aren't you afraid of being here alone?" Afraid? Why should I be? I've done no evil to anyone. Done no evil, I thought. After all the land he and his people have stolen, after destroying our life for so long, why then carry a gun? I'm supposed to. How convenient for you to live so close to this valley. You just walk down the hill and you're here. I come here to be alone, the settlers said, pointedly. I caught the innuendo, but I was not going to go away and leave him now without trying to find out a few things about this unwelcome neighbor of mine. Were you born in Dolev? No, but my parents moved here when I was 5. What about you? Where do you live? Ramallah, I answered. I suspected you were an Arab, but was not sure. Arabs don't walk. How do you know that? Are you acquainted with many Arabs? No, not at all. Then how did you come upon that conclusion? Just from watching the village people nearby, I never see them taking walks or sitting by the water. Perhaps because they're afraid. Why should they be afraid? Because of you. Of me? Yes. Aren't you carrying a gun? I wish I wasn't. It's heavy and it's a burden. But as I said, I have to. I couldn't help saying, I suppose you do, in a heavily sarcastic voice, though I regretted doing so almost immediately. What do you mean? The settler snapped. To protect the land you've taken from us, I said in a matter-of-fact way, resigned to what was coming. We didn't take anyone's land. Dolev is built entirely on public land. Assuming it is, why should you be the only beneficiaries? Because it was promised to us. All of Eretz Israel is ours. And where do you propose we live? You have your place, we have ours. But you're constantly expanding and taking more land. There's hardly any left to build our state. Why do you need another state? You already have 21 Arab states. We've only got one. Can't you think for yourself? I blurted. Can you only repeat what you've been told? He looked at me with an expression of shock and defiance. He was not going to take this. Good, I thought. Perhaps now I will get some real emotions and honest thought. Did you know that this land you're on has been declared a nature reserve? We are protecting this spot. Except for us, it would have been ruined. As a walker, you should appreciate this. I couldn't believe it. I said, "You're protecting our land? After all the damage your bulldozers have done, digging highways in these hills, pouring concrete to build settlements, you claim to be preserving this land? I have not been able to enjoy these hills since your people came. I walk in fear of being shot at or arrested." There was a time when this place was like a paradise, a cultivated garden with a house by every spring, a small, unobtrusive house built without concrete. And then the Jews came like the serpent and ruined everything in the idyllic garden. You blame us for everything, don't you? But it doesn't matter. We've learned our lesson from our long, tortured history. Here, in our own land, our existence is not premised on your acceptance. We've long since found out that we have to be strong if we are to survive here. There was little to say after this, but I made one last effort to alert him to what was being done to the land by those who claimed to love it. I said, "The way it's going, we'll end up with a land that is crisscrossed with roads. I have a vision of all of us going around and around in circles. Whether we call it Israel or Palestine, this land will become one big concrete maze." He said nothing. He was still holding my wet hat. We were both standing up. "Would you let me have my hat?" I asked. "I want to continue with my walk." He stepped forward. I reached out and took the hat, turned my back, and began walking. I could feel the settler's presence with his gun behind me. Then I heard him calling after me to stop. It felt more like an order, which the law, his law, gave him the power to enforce. I feared for the worst. But when I turned around, I realized he was not threatening me. Instead, he gestured at his nargile. "Would you like to smoke with me?" he asked.
Nicole Brossard, Québec. Ce soir, si tu rapproches ton visage et que la civilisation s'étire au bout de tes bras, ce soir, si en plein vol, tu rattrapes mon image, dis que c'était au loin, comme un dé dans la nuit. On appelle bruit de beauté la mer soudée au sel, dans l'infiniment nuit, au-delà de tous les récits. On appelle aussi bruit de beauté le silence, sa signature lente au bas de l'aube. And since we need letters to write and to breathe, 3 letters. L. Lèvres lilas longtemps, liqueur de lumière et de littérature, ou petit lézard de lido, lové dans mon lexique lion de questions. Au bord des lèvres lesbiennes longtemps, libres de larmes, sous l'azur lapis-lazuli, je me languis d'un goût de l'aube doux et de loukoum. Longtemps, je fis cette lecture de lagunes et de langues lointaines lyriques. Le P. Pour toutes les passions au présent, parfois une promenade. Nous plongions dans le paysage avec des phrases, des pensées au pouvoir de parfums et de paradoxes. Parfois, la poussière. On la disait de Pékin, de Palmyre ou de Pompéi. Nous la partagions à plein poumon. On parlait de physiquement posséder la poésie. Et le J. Jadis, les jeudis de juillet, je jonglais dans mon journal avec jardin, jacaranda, un jeu jujube, jubilant entre mes joues, un jeu jailli, jaguar de toujours, joie de juillet. Merci. Et and some excerpt from my last novel translated into English, Fences and Breathing, and the translation is by Suzanne de Lotbinière-Harwood. C'était 2 phrases, avec une idée du temps et de la nuit. Des phrases perméables à la mort et à l'oubli. On aurait pu facilement croire à une histoire entre elles. Chaque phrase allait déverser son sens dans un grand vivier de tourments et de questions, avec des mots toujours plus faciles à caresser. Pourtant, l'une et l'autre cherchaient à comprendre les lois de sa propre gravité. Lorsque les 2 phrases se croisaient trop vite ou trop souvent, sans qu'il semble y avoir d'explication, la réalité intérieure bottait l'univers d'un coup sec et glorieux. Il restait une blessure au milieu de l'univers. Il fallait l'observer, puis ne pas avoir peur de s'y enfoncer jusqu'à ce que l'univers redevienne l'univers. C'est ainsi que les phrases avançaient dans la nuit, emportant avec elles un tremblement du cœur, un goût de cette éternité recommencée au bord du vide, fascinante, comme l'aube, en toute langue maternelle, en toute langue étrangère. Qu'est-ce qui me fait croire dans la tête que je suis quelqu'un d'autre qui ne peut pas vraiment me ressembler, ou peut-être le contraire? C'est effrayant, ce tapis des mots, le rouleau des images, et rien pour expliquer si on est là, si on fait semblant d'être là, si on est avec quelqu'un en soi qu'on aime, ou qui nous fend la tête en 2 pour que nos pensées se disséminent au loin, jusque dans le cosmos, et qu'enfin on puisse pleurer, tout bien vidé de sa respiration. Se parler à soi-même ne fait de mal à personne. Et beaucoup de gens dans les hôtels le font tout naturellement. Se parler à soi-même n'est pas faire semblant de parler à quelqu'un qu'on a sur la conscience ou à qui il faut répéter des insultes ou des mots doux selon notre enfance et les saisons. Il faut beaucoup de liberté pour se parler à soi-même du monde dans lequel on vit. La liberté est enfouie, je ne la distingue plus sous les milliers de pages de lois qui ont poussé depuis que l'acier des fusils tire un peu partout aux frontières du réel. On ne change pas une loi sans qu'une autre loi nous en donne la permission. J'aime parler seule devant les grands miroirs qui décorent les chambres d'hôtel. Ça m'aide à jongler avec les différentes facettes de mon corps et les objets qui décorent la chambre. Je suis quelqu'un qui a facilement des gestes de frayeur. C'est ainsi. Quand je passe 3 fois devant la même fenêtre qui fait des gros plans sur la vraie vie des gens, c'est comme si je parlais à haute voix à ma partie invisible, pour ne pas avoir peur et pour qu'elle me donne de la joie. Rester vivant, dit la voix, s'applique aussi à toutes les filles. Qui que vous soyez, restez vivant, à cause du vent lisse dans les roses et dans vos délires. Restez vivant, montrez-vous avec vos syllabes et vos images, n'ayez pas peur de toucher à votre mélancolie. Restez vivant, malgré les mouches et les brûlures, les petites décorations, les armoires fermées de chacun. Restez vivant, les bras ouverts comme les pages d'un dictionnaire. Respirez haut et fort entre les signes, les miroirs, les petits croquis. N'oubliez pas votre gris-gris et la grammaire latine. Restez vivant, malgré votre mère dans son bain, les terroristes et les menteurs. Restez vivant, dans l'axe de la lune, et touchez donc à vos miroirs aux bons endroits, avant de vous regarder partir. Restez vivant, comme quelqu'un qui n'est pas vous. Merci.
My name is Jose Dalisay. I come from the Philippines. To give you a sense of our social and physical landscape, let me offer this excerpt from my second novel, where my two main characters, a small-town cop named Walter and a karaoke bar singer named Rory, drive from their town of Paez into the heart of Manila to recover the body of Rory's sister Soledad, a domestic helper reported to have died in Saudi Arabia in mysterious circumstances. It was midday when they reached Laguna, announced by concrete arch on the highway, on either side of which the scenery looked exactly the same, a seamless flat stretch of rice fields fringed by coconuts. Walter had gone around enough to know that many parts of the country looked very different from this, and that there were Filipinos who grew up and grew old, dreaming of mountains and oceans, of places like Paez on the far side of a big island. But he knew in the same way that you could drive for hours and see nothing but ocean on the one side and coconuts on the other. So large was this land, yet so familiar. Walter knew something else, that deep in those groves of coconut and bamboo, beneath the duhat and the tamarind trees, some people bore arms much bigger than his service 38, stewards and devotees of a stubborn faith in, what was it, justice, or the future, or some such abstraction that never seemed to be worth another open-mouthed, fly-infested corpse in a ditch. He had seen a few of those along this same road the first few times he had traveled on it, although the last time, sitting in a provincial bus as a civilian, he thought that he had seen them very much alive, sharp-angled shadows in the thorny bushes and the bamboo brakes. Even now, as he made a careful turn around a blind corner, pounding on his horn and with the engine keening, he did not know if he would be met on the other side by an army carrier or by a makeshift checkpoint, a fallen log, a 55-gallon drum marking the temporary confusion of zones. That was what this country was all about: zones, boundaries, demarcations, reminders of where you belonged and where you stood. To forget these things was to invite disaster, and Walter had no intentions of going down that road again. Prudence was his watchword now. Prudence and circumspection, the studious avoidance of unnecessary conflict, of which, as God himself knew best of all, there was entirely too much in Walter's world. Walter stared ahead at the asphalt road that bored through kilometer after kilometer of coconut country. Now and then an oncoming jeepney laden to the roof with stiff-haired children, green-topped coils of green banana, and trussed-up chickens provided visual relief and nudged Walter back to alertness at the wheel. Rory had collapsed into her corner, yielding finally to the importunings of her shattered nerves, her hands clasping the handkerchief between her knees. Her eyes closed and her breathing grew as regular as the throb of the van's engine, making steady time on a road in a landscape as fixed as the stars above at night. Bizarrely, just as the van crossed a steel bridge into another town, Walter found himself slowing down for a procession of hired jeepneys and tricycles queued up behind a dirty gray station wagon. Its rear top and seats had been sheared to make way for a vinyl flatbed on which a child's white coffin, stenciled with silver scallops, now rested. Walter inched his way along the shoulder past the sorry train, doing his best not to seem disrespectful of the dead, but drawing dark stares all the same from the family in the frontmost jeep just behind the coffin. A small boy, who may well have been the brother of the deceased, waved at him, and Walter smiled back. The boy dropped out of sight, wanting to play a game, but the van had gone on ahead. Rory slept through the interval, her fingers unclenching in their first new hour of repose. I'm going to abbreviate this reading a bit, so this will jump ahead of the screen there. Rory's curiosity drove her to crane her neck out the window, and Walter had to pull her back in to keep passing buses from lopping her head off. The sudden touch of his hand on her arm, a sharp, instinctive tug, jolted her back to her seat, and she caught her breath, realizing how she had been staring open-mouthed at the city, once more transformed as much by herself as by her memory and imagination, which quickened with every new feature that sped past her senses. The hotels and condominiums insolently upthrust against the steel-gray sky, the earth-moving machines that rose and snarled like ravenous prehistoric beasts feasting on the city's guts, the sheer profusion of gleaming new cars and battered jeeps, nudging each other on that 8-lane highway, the shifting billboards flashing one impossibly pretty face, 1 second and an even prettier one the next, the appliance stores and furniture showrooms touting chrome-heavy wares in rakish angles and sexy curves, banks of busy but soundless flat-screen TVs on which the same image moved as of one mind and body, high-backed beds and apple-green sofas that stretched from one end of the room to the other, aquariums aswarm with strange and precious fish. And the people themselves all seemed to know where they were going or how they were expected to act in this massively choreographed, painstakingly produced performance. The pedestrians sure of step, even with cellular phones glued to their ears, the motorists puffing blithely away on their cigarettes and tapping their fingers on their dashboards in tune to some muted radio, staring 100 meters ahead. Rory remembered from her last visit to Manila that the impression would fracture and fail upon closer scrutiny, that she would slip on the grime on the sidewalks and smell the sewage in the culverts and see the palpable confusion in one of every 5 faces she would meet on the street. But in the few minutes that it took to cover 3 or 4 city blocks and what they had to offer, she could absorb only the general rhythm and the vibrancy of things, the surge and swell of a vast and mighty ocean above ground. It was almost absurd to think of the city and of death in the same breath. So adamant was its vitality, its insistence on the attention and respect, almost as if it had grabbed and held you by the jaw of the slow-witted visitor. At that moment, for some reason not immediately clear to Rory herself, but which Walter naturally took to be sisterly bereavement, Rory burst out in tears, caught in the rip of opposing tides, feeling badly for Solly 1 minute and cursing her the next for having done something so grievously stupid as to end up lifeless when there was so much more to see and do, wherever she may have found herself in the bustling universe outside of Paez. Thank you.
Sergio Ramírez from Nicaragua. I am going to read from my last novel, 1000 Deaths Plus One, which has been now published in the United States. El cuchillo de doble filo. Ya había caído la oscuridad y debí acercarme al tubo fluorescente instalado en el alero de la caseta para seguir con mi examen del álbum, cuando me encontré con la instantánea de un desnudo, para nada femenino, y que era un antes para el después de la foto de la portada que mostraba el cadáver de Turgenev en el lecho de su dormitorio de Lefren. Una explicaba a la otra, y su relevancia era mutua. El pie de esta otra decía, el escritor ruso Iván Turgenev tras ser embalsamado, negativo flexible tratado con gelatina. El cuerpo reposa desnudo en una especie de banco de carpintería, envuelto en una luz turbia que baja de alguna claraboya. No parece ser la sala de disección de un hospital, sino alguna de las dependencias de servicio de Lefren, un establo quizás, o una bodega de aparejos con paredes de revoque ennegrecidas por el humo de las velas. Al pie del banco hay un balde que puede ser de ordeño o que está allí para recoger la víscera del cadáver. Pero eso no es todo. A un lado, ofreciendo apenas el perfil a la cámara, Paulín García Viardot observa el cuerpo con unción religiosa, los hombros echados hacia adelante. No hay que olvidar que Ernesta Grisi se solazaba en llamarla la jorobada, y vestida de riguroso luto, el velo echado sobre el rostro. Es una visita furtiva la de Paulín a ese cobertizo después que el embalsamador ha terminado su trabajo, como furtiva también es la presencia del fotógrafo que tomó la instantánea desde fuera a través de la ventana. Venía cargando sus maletas de latón por el camino entre los fresnos y se sentó a descansar sobre una de ellas cerca del cobertizo cuando advirtió el golpeteo de los postigos sueltos movidos por el viento y se asomó. Allí estaba Turgeniev desnudo sobre el banco y Paulín en su actitud de contemplación inmóvil. Se apresuró en buscar su cámara portátil en el bolso de mano, tomó la foto asomando apenas la cabeza y desapareció de inmediato del cuadro de la ventana, temeroso de haber sido denunciado por el ruido del obturador. Entonces siguió viaje con sus maletas hacia la dacha para aguardar a que el cadáver, una vez vestido, fuera transportado hasta la cama y proceder a cumplir así con el encargo de la Revue de Monde que lo había traído hasta Lefren. El cuerpo desnudo, que en el contraste de la fotografía mal iluminada parece tan blanco como si se tratara del cadáver de un leproso, apenas cabe en el banco en que se haya expuesto, igual que en la otra, ya vestido, apenas cabe en la cama. Y también esta destaca en primer plano los pies, que libre de los botines de 7 leguas parecen los de un viejo rey eslavo plácidamente dormido tras una noche de amor febril. La barba y el cabello en desorden, las piernas todavía firmes, el pecho ancho poblado de un ligero vello cano, las 2 tetillas oscuras como ojos que aún vigilan y el vientre plano sin asomo de esa grosería senil que es la barriga floja hinchada de grasa. El rey eslavo parece disfrutar la majestad de su reposo ajeno a su desnudez y Paulín podría ser tomada por la criada que no se atreve a despertarlo, fijo los ojos saltones en el sexo que descuella entre la pelambre del pubis como la masa de un mortero de boticario. Pero toda esa armonía serena queda rota por la burda costura que muestra sus largas puntadas desde el esternón hasta el estómago. Tras practicarle una evisceración radical, necesaria porque le espera un largo viaje en tren hasta Petersburgo, el embalsamador le ha inyectado en las venas 2 litros de formol y ha rellenado de estopa las cavidades que guardaban los órganos blandos para terminar cosiendo el extenso tajo con crin de caballo. La regla hipócrita de Flaubert señala que uno no debe involucrarse, repetía Duchamp, después que Primoli se había alejado de Castellón con las manos en alto como pidiendo paz. Sediento de experiencias, puedes irte al Alto Egipto a presenciar la caza de negros y de elefantes, pero solo como un observador al que las emociones no pueden desviar de su cometido de ver. Negro y elefante son solo motivos o pretextos de la naturaleza rica en variedades de crueldad y maravilla destinados al ojo. Una niña esclava de 10 años, por ejemplo, a la que sus dueños, un par de mercaderes cristianos que van a embarcarse en Beirut, meten en el agua para restregarle con arena la piel hasta hacerla sangrar. A la luz del amanecer, solo es visible entre las olas el cuerpo desnudo de la niña y el grueso anillo de cobre al cuello, sangre rojo escarlata sobre negro de ébano. Pero es cierto, discute Primoli, el artista es un patólogo que conservará las piezas disecadas en los frascos de formol de su memoria. De otra manera, sería cambiarse al papel de redentor. pueden estar desollando a tu propia madre, a tu propia hija, y tu deber es registrar el hecho. Tal vez, se dirá ahora Castellón, cuando ya ha tomado la foto del cadáver desnudo, la neutralidad consiste en verse uno mismo como un objeto, aún en el momento en que el sifilítico hurga dentro de la vagina de una prostituta antes de penetrarla, unos dedos que se mueven solamente para aprender las sensaciones del tacto, pero como si no fueran propios. El artista que infecta con el suyo otro cuerpo, pero no infecta la página o el negativo. Y el cuchillo de doble filo cortante, uno para la belleza, otro para la fealdad, la llaga y el ornamento, el olor de los azahares junto al olor de los cadáveres, el gusano en la rama florida, pero los dos filos en armonía en el todo que es el cuchillo mismo, un instrumento único que sirve para desollar la carne y sacar las vísceras y a la vez para desmontar la piedra preciosa, separar la perla de la ostra, cortar la rosa del tallo. La belleza siempre está contaminada, nada ocurre por separado. Gracias.
Nagy karácsonyi gyilkosság. Két egymást követő éjszakán kétszer néztem végig, hogy miként ítélik halálra és miként végzik ki az egykori román államelnököt és feleségét. Hideg fejjel néztem végig, hogy a zsarnokgyilkosságot miként élvezem. Néztem, hogy élvezetem miatt elvileg szégyenkeznem kéne, mégsem szégyenkezem, nincs bennem kímélet, szánalmat sem érzek a házaspár iránt. Jogszerű bírósági eljárások híve vagyok. Lelkismeretem ennek ellenére közömbösen hallgatott. Nem vagyok híve a halálbüntetésnek, az eljárás brutalitása mégsem sértette az ízlésemet. Az alantas élvezet veszélyesen közel áll a nemes élvezethez. Talán azért van így, mert a kétféle élvezetre nincsenek külön idegszálaink. Bármilyen élvezet felgyorsíthatja, vagy éppen megakasztja a légzést, s olyan érzést kelt, mintha töredék időkre blokkolná a keringést. Az emlősök fiziológiája zárt szisztéma. Az erős politikai izgalom vagy a vallási elragadtatás görbéje nem sokban különbözik a szeretkezés emelkedő görbéjétől. Mintha attól lehetett volna tartani, hogy kitörnek a kopárteremből, a rettegett házaspárt beszorították két vaslábú asztal és a fal közé. A teremben hideg lehetett, vagy a rögtönítélő bíróság egyenruhás tagjai nem engedték meg a zsarnokoknak, hogy levegyék a kabátjukat. Siettek velük, minél előbb túl kellett a dolgon lenniük, nem volt törvényes felhatalmazásuk. S ha lett volna is, úgy akarták leölni a két zsarnokot, miként kedves, szívesen vakargatott disznóikat egy téli hajnalon. Volt a sietségben politikai megfontolás is. Amíg életben vannak a zsarnokok, minden restaurációs kísérlet legitim, és akkor nekik lesz végük. Ki kit öl meg előbb, ez volt itt a kérdés. Elena Ceausescu szörmével bélelt, világos köpenyt viselt. Összefogta magán, ezzel védekezett, fázott is, de valószínűleg inkább a félelemtől. Tudta, mi fog történni. Mondta is. Nicolae Ceausescunak nem működött ilyen jól az önfegyelme, és biztos vagyok benne, hogy nem csupán az alkati korlátoltsága védte. Az akkor 71 éves férfi 44 éven át a központi bizottság tagja volt. Ez túl sok ahhoz, hogy az ember az agyvelejének legalább egyetlen kis foltocskáját még józanul megőrizze. Csak nézte a feleségét, forgatta a ravasz kis szemét, idegességében kínosan vigyorgott, látszott a vonásain, fel nem tudja fogni, mi történik itt, s hogyan lehetne urrá-e történéseken. Az operatőr hol kettőjüket vette, hol a rögtönítélő bíróság tagjait. Nem talált magának a teremben olyan szemszöget, ahonnan egyszerre lehetett volna rálátása a résztvevőkre. Ráadásul billegett, zökkent, reszketett a gép a kezében, határozatlanul forgolódott. Nem csak azért, mert nem értett a munkájához, hanem a rettegést és a bosszúvágyát sem tudta csillapítani. Személyes érzelmeit nem tudta összhangba hozni a feladatával. Ennek a filmnek a tökéletes és teljes dilettantizmus ad esztétikai befejezettséget. Nincsen olyan tárgya, fénye, szereplője, hangja, eszköze, mely ne lenne alantas, ronda és dilettáns. Ezen a filmen le vannak sötétítve az ablakok, ajtó nem látható. A diktatúrának nincsen kijárata. Azóta sem tudjuk pontosan, hol vagyunk. A szabadságot nem ajándékba kapja az ember. Az operatőr a rögtönítélő bíróság rettegő tagjainak heves indulatkitöréseivel azonosul, és mi követjük kiszámíthatatlan csapongásait, ami katartikus felismeréshez vezetne, ha a rögtönítélő bíróság tagjaival együtt az igazság áttörését élhetnénk át. De nem ez történik. Kicsinyes bosszúvágyuk jegyében ítélik halálra a két zsarnokot. Amikor a kivégzés előtt valami éles és kemény, szárító kötéllel hátukon kötözik össze a zsarnokok kezét, Elena Ceausescu szájából halljuk a színjáték egyetlen emberi mondatát. Készek a halálra, de a bánásmód ellen még tiltakoznak. Nem az emberi méltóságukat féltik, hanem még mindig a tekintélyüket. A katonák rettegése ezzel szemben olyan mértéktelen, hogy félő, nem tudják tisztességesen elvégezni botrányos dolgukat. Mitől féltek ennyire? A női kiáltást a dulakodás mélyéről lehet fölhallani. És hogy még teljesebb legyen a diktatúrák rettenetes önarcképe, a legutolsó jelenetben megszólal az is, akinek hallgatnia kéne. Az operatőr szól az orvosnak a kamera mögül, már kinn az udvaron. Annyira reszket az orvos keze, hogy sztetoszkópjával nem találja a nyaki ütőeret. Vagy legalább a szemhéj alá be tudna nézni. Minden ujja, egész teste reszket. Ez sem megy. Emelt föl a fejét. Lássuk, hogy halott. Ha kilép orvosi szerepéből, ha megteszi, akkor megszakítja a több ezer éves áramot, mely személyét és szakmáját még egy utolsó kicsi fonálon Hippokratészhoz köti. Ha megteszi, akkor végrehajtja a diktatúrák legrettenetesebb ítéletét, semmi nem szent. Végrehajtja. Fölemeli és megmutatja nekünk Nicolae Ceausescu halott fejét. Lehúzza az alsó szemhéjakat, hogy belenézhessünk a diktátor halott szemébe. Ezzel a pusztító érzéki tapasztalattal együtt visszük át a diktatúrák logikáját a következő évezredbe.
Good evening. My name is Edwidge Danticat. I'll be reading two poems by Félix Moïse-Leroy, who is a legendary Haitian playwright and poet who wrote primarily in Haitian Creole. He died 10 years ago in Miami, but he would have loved this evening. The first poem is called Tourist. It's an ironic response to tourists who take pictures of poor, dirty people in poor countries. So next time you take someone's picture while you're on vacation, someone who looks poor and dirty and hungry, this is what they might be thinking. Touriste, pas prend portrait. Pas prend portrait touriste. M'toi laid, m'toi sale, m'toi meg. Pas prend portrait blanc. Monsieur Ismen pas content, non? M'toi laid, koda kwa krasé. M'toi sale, m'toi noir. Blanc, appareil ou pas content. M'toi laid. M'a pété kodak là. Pas prend portrait touriste. Quitte-moi tranquille, blanc. Pas prend portrait bourrique, moi. Bourrique ici, pote trop chay. Bourrique ici, trop petit. Bourrique ici, pas manger. Pas prend portrait bête, moi. Touriste, pas prend portrait caille là. Caille, moi, c'est caille paille. Pas prend portrait, joue pas, moi. Joue pas, c'est caille te. Caille la tout casé, touriste. Al tire portrait palais. Al tire portrait bicentenaire. Pas prend portrait jardin, pas prend portrait charrette, m'pas gen char, m'pas gen machine, m'pas gen tracteur. Pas prend portrait pied bois. Touriste, pied à terre, rad moi tout chiré. Malais nèg pas garder blanc. Mais touriste, garde cheveux. Koda quoi pas habitué à coulem. Quoi faire pas habitué à cheveux. Touriste, pas prend portrait. Ou pas comprendre pause moi. Ou pas comprendre nos affaires touriste. Give me 5 cents. Et puis, elle fait chez mon touriste. This one is called Boat People. He wrote this, this poem after, in the 1980s, where people were just coming in large numbers by boat to Miami, and some bodies were washing on shores. This was about the same time that I came at 12 from Haiti to the United States. And in my junior high school, we were called this all the time, boat people. So I have a special appreciation for this poem also for this reason. Boat people. Nous tout n'ayons connaître n'a coulé. Ça t'est arrivé déjà à Saint-Domingue. C'est nous seuls les boat people. Nous tous nous mourir depuis longtemps. Ça crée encore kou kam fait paix. Qui te les nous boat people? C'est jodi an ap gouné ak la misère, nan zile, sous la mer, tout partout. C'est zot qui les nous boat people. Nan Guinée, yo te ken ben ak chien. Met chen nan pied nous, embarquer nous. Ça pour te les nous boat people. Moitié cargaison te péri. Yon van reste la marché kwa bossal. C'est zot qui rele nous boat people. Je nous frappe pied n'te ap tremblé. Jouk la Louisiane, jix Venezuela. Ça que te venu rele nous boat people. Yon mauvais temps te passé sous pays noir. Grand goût fait chien manger raquette. Yon pas encore rele nous boat people. N'a bousqué job ak liberté. Yon bourre une kante DMP. Zot tombe rele nous boat people. Nous tap couru pour faire dimanche, nous venons échouer dans Chrome Avenue. C'est autres qui relèvent nos boat people. Chalet Miami ou était nam nous, Freddy Chicago pété fiel nous. Boat people, boat people, boat people. Et pourtant, en étant viens yo, qui américain qui pas venu ici? C'est nous yo vle les boat people. Nous pas pote drogue dans jakout nous pote courage nous pour nous travail. Boat people, c'est ça même, boat people. Nous pas vinn pour nous battre traka, nous vinn avec respect nous. C'est autres qui le nous boat people. Nous pas parler fort, nous pas parler trop. Mais tout boat people égal ego. Tout boat people, yo c'est boat people. Yon jour n'a levé n'a frapper pied nous. Quand nous fait ça, j'en nous te fait dans Saint-Domingue là. Y a connaît qui les qui boat people. Jou ça qui c'était Christophe Colomb, qui c'était Henry Kissinger, y a connaît qui est nous-mêmes nous les people. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Salman Rushdie. I'm going to read a bit from my novel, Shalimar the Clown. This passage is about the title character, who is a member of a troupe of traveling players in Kashmir, who has become attracted to and has been drawn towards joining the militant insurgency. And in this passage, he has been taken up into the mountains to receive training from a character known as the Iron Mullah, who I'm sorry to say is quite like a Terminator because he looks like a human being outside, but he's got metal inside. He's actually made of iron. And that's not the worst thing about him. The Iron Mullah, Maulana Bulbul Fakh, was their appointed superior. His breath was still the sulfurous dragon breath that had earned him his stinky name, Fakh, and he still spoke in the old harsh way, as if human speech was painful to him. But he was taller than Shalimar the Clown remembered, a giant, over 6 feet tall, and also leaner and much more beautiful than in the old days in Shirmal. Was it possible that he had grown bigger and more attractive with the passing years? As for his being made of iron, there could no longer be any argument about that. There were places on his shins and shoulders where the knocks of a hard life had rubbed away the covering of skin and the dull metal beneath had become visible, battle-hardened, indestructible. These proofs of his miraculous nature gave Bulbul Fakh great authority in the camps in the mountains. He carried a lump of rock salt at all times. "This is Pakistani salt," he told the Liberation Front commander and his men. "This we will bring to Kashmir when we set it free." He wrapped the salt in a green handkerchief and put it away in a bag. "The green is for our religion, which makes all things possible, God willing," he said. "With the blessing of God," they replied. The Iron Mullah led them to a forward camp known as FC-22, a frontline facility of the Markaz Dawar Center for Worldwide Islamist Jihadist Activities set up by Pakistan Inter-Services Intelligence. FC-22 in those early days was a shithole. There were few pakka buildings. The only sleeping accommodation was in filthy patched-up tents and not enough food or warmth. However, there were staggering quantities of weapons available, and there were ISI personnel on hand to offer training in the use of these weapons, including high-precision sniper-killer training. There were firing ranges with moving targets and instructors who would push the new recruits in the back or jog their elbows at the same time as ordering them to fire. And they had to learn not to miss, because hitting a moving target when they were off balance was what they were being taught. There were weekly seminars about and real-time training exercises in high-speed, guerrilla-style strike and withdraw operations across the line of control. There was a bomb factory and a course in fifth column infiltration technique, and above all, there was prayer. The 5 daily prayers at the camp Maidan were compulsory for all the fighters, and the only book permitted at the site, training manuals accepted, was the Holy Quran. In between formal prayers, there was much discussion of God by foreigners speaking in languages which Shalimar the Clown did not understand, in which only the word for God stood out. Maulana Bulbul Fakh was his guide to weaponry and foreigners alike. But before he was ready to embark on the great work at hand, his consciousness had to be altered. Shalimar the Clown was asked to make certain revisions in his worldview. It is not possible to shoot straight, Bulbul Fakh said bluntly, if the way you see things is all screwed up. Ideology was primary. The infidel, obsessed with possessions and wealth, did not grasp this and believed that men were primarily motivated by social and material self-interest. This was the mistake of all infidels, and also their weakness, which made it possible for them to be defeated. The true warrior was not motivated primarily by worldly desires, but by what he believed to be true. Economics was not primary. Ideology was primary. The Iron Mullah took upon himself the task of re-educating all newcomers. It was a part of his gift to the revolution, a part of God's work. Shalimar the clown sat on a boulder by a frozen mountain stream and listened to the Iron Mullah, as once he had listened to Pandit Pyarelal while longing for the simple happiness of his daughter's touch. But that happiness had proved to be an illusion, a deception, and Shalimar the clown's memory of being deceived made the Iron Mullah's lessons easier to accept. Everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality, about how things worked and what things were, was wrong, the Iron Mullah said. That was the first thing for the true warrior to understand. Yes, Shalimar the clown thought, that's right. Everything I thought I knew about her was a mistake. The visible world, the world of space and time and sensation and perception in which they had believed themselves to be living, was a lie. Yes, that's so. Everything that seemed to be was not. Yes. By crossing the mountains, they had passed through a curtain and stood now on the threshold of the world of truth, which was invisible to most men. Thank God, thought Shalimar the clown, truth at last, truth that endures, truth that will never become a lie. In the world of truth, the Iron Mullah preached, there was no room for weakness, argument, or half measures. Before the power of truth, every knee must bow, and then truth will protect you. Truth will keep your soul safe in the palm of its mighty hand. In the palm of its hand. Only the truth can be your father now, but through the truth you will be fathers of history. Only the truth can be my father. Only the truth can be your mother now, but when the truth has won its victory, all mothers will bless your names. Only the truth can be my mother. Only the truth can be your brother, but in truth you will be a brother to all men. Only the truth can be my brother. Only the truth can be your wife. Only the truth can be my wife. Time itself was the servant of truth, the Iron Mullah told them. Years could pass in an instant, or a moment could be infinitely prolonged if the truth were best served by doing so. If the so-called laws of the universe were illusions, if these fictions were no more than the fabric of the veil behind which truth was concealed, then human nature was an illusion also, and human desires, and human intelligence, human character, and human will would all bow to truth's imperatives once the veil was removed. No man could face the naked truth, defy it, and survive. The infidel believes in the immutability of the soul, said Bulbul Fakh, but we believe that all things can be transformed in the service of the truth. The infidel says that a man's character will decide his fate. We say that a man's fate will forge his character anew. The infidel holds that the picture of the world he draws is a picture we must all recognize. We say that his picture means nothing to us, for we live in a different world. The infidel speaks of universal truth. We know that the universe is an illusion, and that truth lies beyond the illusion, where the infidel cannot see. The infidel believes the world is his, but we shall drive him from his redoubts and cast him into darkness and live in paradise and rejoice as he plunges into the fire. Shalimar the clown rose to his feet and tore off his garments. Take me, he cried. Truth, I am ready for you. He was a trained performer, a leading actor in the leading troupe in the valley, and so of course he could make his gestures convincing and imbue his journey towards nakedness with more meaning than any other 18-year-old youth. He stripped off his shirt and shouted out his acquiescence. I cleanse myself of everything except the struggle. Without the struggle I am nothing, he screamed his assent. Take me or kill me now, and stripped off his undergarments. The passion of his avowals made an impression on the Iron Mullah. We knew that those who chose to make the arduous winter journey over the pass must have been driven from within to do so, he said. But in you, the desire burns more fiercely than I had thought. He helped Shalimar the clown put his clothes back on, to dress himself in garments transformed by his shedding of them into the raiment of belonging. When he was fully clothed again, Shalimar the clown prostrated himself at the feet of Bulbul Fakh and almost believed his own performance. Thank you.